Hey everyone, welcome back to Life Unpotted. This is Sophie here, joined with Daisy, and today we are going to start off this conversation by talking about this journey of changing our lives. The process of discovering what is it that you truly want in this life. And interesting because we talk so much about our inner state, because our inner state is what determines our outer state. Our inner world is what determines the way in which we experience this life. And reflecting on it now being many months since, it's been about 8 or so months since we moved from New York City, where I spent 8 years of my 20s, and then decided I wanted to live elsewhere. I wanted to try something new. And it's interesting, like we've been reflecting on, because it's been really difficult moving. We've been reflecting on there's been times of why did we do this? Why did we think that this is going to be easy? And it's been uncomfortable. It's been challenging, adjusting and living in a new place and not knowing anyone. But at the same time, it's been the most rewarding, beautiful experience, it feels like, of my life, which I wonder if I was to still be in New York and I was still to be in that life, what would it be like? And I guess I say that for the point of thinking about how easy it is to stay fixed in our lives and not try new things and not grow and not push ourselves and not take action. All the while, what we really want, what we really are interested in, is going to be on the other side of discomfort. And an example I'll give is, so Daisy and I moved from New York to Austin. We're living in a residential neighborhood right now. My mornings look a lot different than they did in New York. From a practical standpoint, yes, I am doing essentially the same things. I'm waking up, meditating, going for a walk, but my environment is entirely different. I'm around a lot more nature. I'm around trees and butterflies and birds and the occasional random birds that we see in the pond near us, and spending time in the local park and seeing what I felt was so scary at one point, like imagining living somewhere new. I now see that everything can become familiar. Everything that was once unfamiliar will become comfortable. But you have to give yourself the time to really go through it. And we've had thoughts of are we going to move again? Are we going to leave Austin? And when you go from living somewhere for 8 years and you're living somewhere for only 8 months, obviously that temptation of resorting back to comfort will arise. And I guess it's just making me think about how, number one, I am so grateful that we pushed ourselves to move and to find out another way of life. And it's just broadening my mind even more, whether Austin becomes a stepping stone or a vehicle, and everything in life being a vehicle, right? But from a sense of, if we decide to live elsewhere, if we decide to travel more and go live in another country, right? Now that feels a lot less scarier. It feels a lot more realistic, because we did something scary already. So I think I'm just reflecting on how it's really easy to stay in a very small life because we don't know otherwise. And I guess I'm just here to express to the listeners, to the podcast, to you, that there is so much more to life. And I think a lot of the times we are not really living the way we actually want to live, because what we actually want to do is scary. But what we actually want to do is so entirely fulfilling and true to our real selves and our true selves and our true beings, and that deep, deep, deep connection with who we really are beyond the mask that we've been wearing. So that's where I want to start this conversation.
Well, I think one of the first things that came to mind when you started reflecting on how do you change your life? How do you move? What do you do to change your life? I feel like we've talked about that so many times in this podcast. My first thought was, okay, we've talked about this before. But my second thought to that thought was, well, it's a continuation of that experience that we're continuing to have. It continues to give us more insights. It continues to go deeper into our understanding of what it means to change your life. The more time that becomes present between those two ends, the more you begin to process and to understand. So I think maybe what you're looking to do is to like go deeper into that understanding, because the more days go by, the more you see how you're a different person and how you look back to where you moved from, in our case, New York, and it's the exact same. And I think that's what's interesting, is that when you leave a place, 8 months go by, you look back and that place is the exact same. And you look at yourself and you're like, well, my life looks quite a bit different. I feel quite a bit different. And it makes you wonder, well, if I never left, where would I be? And that doesn't really matter. But I think it's more the question to point to, well, look what you did do and look where you are. And it's hard to see yourself sometimes. And it just feels like I'm starting to see the depths of moving. And I think something that you said was interesting. When deep down, like, you know, this is something that you want for a long period of your life, but you're not able to access it because it's too scary. It feels impossible to do. Because I think back to when I was like 23, I didn't want to be in New York, but that's just what I thought I had to do. It's like autopilot starts to take control of what you can and cannot do. And at the end of the day, you're not trusting yourself. And I think part of what has been so uncomfortable with this move of quitting our jobs, moving here, me nannying for a large portion of time, was that it required a level of trust in oneself, a trust that I've never put into myself to figure it out. You know, moving to New York City to be seen as someone who lived in New York City, who had a good job. Switching from that to, yep, I'm moving to Austin and I'm nannying and I have a podcast. That doesn't really do much for the ego because there's nothing to hide behind. You're doing what you're doing. And the outcome is not readily obvious of why you're doing that. So I think it is just a pointer to, you must trust yourself, or you're taking a risk on yourself, or you're instilling trust that you are going to figure this out. And maybe that is part of it, but I think in that part of it, an evolution of realizing how you're perceived by anyone doesn't really matter. I think so much of my time in New York, I was so focused on how I was being perceived, and that's where a lot of my validation came from. And I don't even think about that today. The way that I would want to post something on Instagram because I'd want people to see me a certain way. I see how much energy I put into those things. And now it's like I don't even think about that. And it just shows my energy goes to a lot of other things. And that doesn't mean that it's easier, because I think that can be, I don't want to say it's a distraction, but it can be a method for feeling better about yourself that is in the shallow, and it's not going to the root of things. And I guess like we've just dove into the deep end. I guess it's also diving into an internal world. So it's almost like no one else exists around you. Like you're really just focused on yourself. And I think I just want to go back to how you started it. It's like you never knew that this way of life was possible. And all I mean by that is the way you interact with life. Because I think we both grew up, and maybe this is really common, both grew up thinking, okay, we have to achieve because our value comes from that. And our value comes from how we're perceived and how successful we are. So I'm going to martyr my well-being in the name of getting somewhere that looks a certain way, that maybe I can hold on to that little idea of what I'm being perceived as a way to keep me going. But for me, there's no spark in that. It feels like there's no spark in my eye. There was no spark in my eye when I was doing that. And this journey of deepening our inner world, of really what the move and all this is, it's just a vessel for this deepening of our inner worlds. It's just a really big shift in where your priorities are. And I think that's just a lot to process, having such a big shift in your life where you turn everything upside down. And I'm sure, this is something that is felt among other people, but I think it can oftentimes feel isolating. Like you don't know why you're doing it or what the point of it is. But then I think you realize what it means to live a life that you're actually connected to yourself. And that means you actually live a life that is based in something real, and that allows you to have real connections with people, real relationships with people, where you're not just looking to them to get your needs met because you need something, or you're able to actually show up in a state that is you. You're not putting on a mask. And that's really scary. So I think this is a continued evolution of that. I think that's what the move signifies to me. And I think a big core of it is sitting through a lot of the discomfort that otherwise that discomfort in the past would have spurred you to go to a distraction, whether that's obsessing over how you appear on Instagram, obsessing over food, drinks, coffee, all this stuff. There's so many different modalities for distraction, or how we choose, of obsessing over working out, obsessing over anything. Instead of looking to solve how you're feeling by finding a solution, instead just sitting with it and realizing that it's nothing in your life that's making you upset. It's just this feeling. So just sitting with it versus trying to fix it is going to allow you to move out of it when you least expect it. And I think that's really the commitment. It's to taking accountability for your emotions that allows you to live a deeply fulfilling life. And I guess that's what we're doing here, to an extreme. I don't know if to an extreme, but maybe that's just what it feels like when you switch from living your life very externally. And granted, this has been a process of like 3 years, so it's been somewhat gradual, and moving just supercharged it because it removed everything around us. So it just further propelled us into that. So I'm curious what your thoughts are, but a lot there.
Wow, there's a lot there. Everything you said kind of helped me understand better what I was thinking, and I think that's the beautiful power of conversation. Like, there's so much there within that is hard to understand on your own sometimes. So talking to someone else can be helpful to do that. And I feel like it's like we're kind of describing this process of a transformation of literally like transforming yourself, which it's interesting because we know, as we talk about, like, the transformation is really just coming back to who you've always been, and it's unlearning all of the stories and beliefs and thought patterns that have kept you from that person. And one of the things you were saying of kind of, for the first time ever, you're not thinking about how you're being perceived. I think that we talk a lot about perception and the way we're being perceived in regard to social media. But now that I have time to reflect on my time in my 20s and as a lawyer and living this life, everything I did was in an effort to be perceived. But it was so deeply rooted and ingrained that I literally did not know the difference. Like, that's why this process has been so hard, because you take this one person who's put and invested so much time. I've invested since probably high school until I was 30. Like, that's like 12 plus years of an idea that is so it's like every day I'm nailing it in of like, this is the person I'm going to be. This is the person I'm going to be. This is the life I'm going to live. This is the way I want my life. And what I'm really doing is so disconnected from myself that I'm trying to control everything around my life because I guess I learned that a quote unquote happy life means XYZ. Like, I think it really does come back to chasing happiness because as humans, we're always looking to get fulfilled. And I think we go on this trajectory of trying to find that. And it's like we settle on that one thing. So for me, that was I'm going to be a lawyer. I'm going to be a partner. I'm going to live in New York. I'm going to marry a man and I'm going to move to the suburbs.
Well, it seems like we get so obsessed with the idea of something. We get attached to the idea of how we want our life to look. And that's something that I also definitely was obsessed with of how am I going to show up in this outfit at work? How am I going to look on my resume? I would be so obsessed with how people were perceiving me. And I think you hit a really important one there of I'm going to be a lawyer. I'm going to live in New York City. I'm going to marry a man. I'm going to have a family. And it's getting obsessed with the idea of these things, all the while actually being miserable, but allowing the idea that this is like you attach a good thing to having these things. So that's good enough because you're like, I'm better or I'm good because I believe that the idea of this is good. The idea of being a lawyer, the idea of living in New York, all of these things are really, really, really great. So it's going to outweigh my misery and allow me to keep pursuing this because I put more value on how I'm perceived than actually how I'm going throughout my life and I'm actually enjoying it. And that makes me think of when I lived in New York and maybe I always just wanted to be in nature. Maybe that's something that was just always valuable to me. But I think about how exhausted I always was. But I was like, but I live in New York. I'm a New Yorker. I live in New York City. So the idea of living in New York City is going to outweigh actually leaving and going and living in nature somewhere because that would make me happier. I would feel more free and more comfortable and more relaxed. But I'm gonna hold on to this idea because I value how I'm perceived. Like I get to attach myself to living in New York, and that allows me to believe something about myself that makes me comfortable.
So it's almost like you mentioned earlier, like our priorities shift. What we're prioritizing shifts. Looking back at your life and looking back on my life, the priority was fitting in. The priority was fitting into this story that we're heavily invested in of being cool or making money, or it's almost like when I look back, I don't even remember thinking these things. And that just goes to show that I was so disconnected. I was so in autopilot. I was literally living in a trance. I had no idea that the thoughts I had were not reality. Like, this is the core of everything we talk about. That when you're going throughout life and you don't ever take the time to pause and to be still, you never get a chance to experience all of the thoughts that are driving you, all of the thoughts that are controlling you that are not you. Plain and simple, are not you. So it's almost a little jarring to realize that we can be asleep for our lives, that we can prioritize being miserable. But I look back at myself and I feel like I didn't know any better. How would I have known? There was no examples in front of me. There was no one around me who was living a mindful life. And that's where this power of social media comes in and podcasts, where we can see, wow, the reality in front of me in the physical location in which I am existing on this planet is not the only reality that's out there. It's not the only way of life. And this is where we expand our mind. But it's crazy to realize how asleep I was and how asleep you were, and really how disconnected we were, and how so many people are because they're terrified. And I think that is the biggest thing I've learned from this journey. I have been terrified deep down of everything and anything. of being with myself, of sitting with myself, of being alone with my thoughts, of feeling emotions, of feeling sadness alone. I have been terrified of not fitting in. I was terrified of even looking at myself in the mirror for an extended period of time. And that's why when I first took psychedelics, it was the first time where I had no choice but to everything got stripped away. And I wonder where I would be if I didn't have that experience on the retreat we went to, honestly, because it was so profoundly impactful and it felt like 30 years of therapy. And obviously so many things were also happening, and I don't want to attribute it solely to that. And ultimately it's not that, it's you. But whether you're going on a retreat or experiences that you can experience that can tap you out of that. And I think that when you're living a life when you have no idea what those things are, it can be daunting to even take that first step and comprehend, oh, I don't want to continue to be this person I am, but I feel so lost because it's all I know. And how can I even imagine changing things?
Well, I think that's where this transition is so interesting because it's happened so gradually where like I used to search the internet and look for clothes that would complete me. I would try to build a wardrobe that would complete me. And it was all out of fight or flight. It was all out of anxiety. I was like, oh, buying this outfit for this trip will make this trip so much better. And this is real. I think this is like something that a lot of girls do because I did it, but it never made me feel good. It was all out of anxiety. It was all out of measuring myself up to other people. It was all out of, am I being perceived as good enough? It was basing my happiness on how I appeared, on external things at the end of the day. So I think it's a really interesting experience to be like, well, I haven't bought a new bathing suit in 3 years and I literally don't care. And I want to care because that's fun. It's fun to have new bathing suits, new clothes. And a part of me is like, it's nice, but it's just not where a priority is because I know if I'm going on a trip, I'm going to much rather invest my energy into connecting with people that are around me than obsessing about how I'm appearing and how I'm looking. And it's kind of disappointing sometimes because that was fun. But it's interesting when you're trying to find the in-between, I guess, of buying a new bathing suit because, you know, you could use a new bathing suit and that's it. But for me, it was never like that. It was always like, oh, the better bathing suit I get has to be the perfect one because that's going to base how I'm going to look. That's going to base how the experience is for me. And there was so much emphasis and weight put onto these things. So it's kind of funny to look back and to look at my life now and just realize, I guess I am just prioritizing so many other things. I think what I'm getting at is, I guess my priorities of what fun look like have changed and they've just gotten more based in reality than anything else. So I think when your context for what fun means shifts like that, it can be confusing a little bit. To go to the opposite spectrum and say, oh, I don't buy anything. Because, you know, that's also an extreme. You know, you can still buy things to look how you want to look with knowing your value doesn't come from them. So I guess I've just seen myself on that extreme of like almost neglecting those parts. So I guess I don't know where the line is to draw there between you're neglecting yourself, take care of yourself, and you're just learning what it means to not get your value from what you put on your body.
Well, again, it's like not what you're buying. It's not the clothes. It's the state in which you're doing it, which I think is what you're explaining is like everything you were doing was in this fight or flight state. And when we're doing something in fight or flight, when we're doing something in an anxious state, like I'm even reflecting on how since we've moved here, when I went to go write a newsletter for the newsletter we send out, I would do it so fast. I would rush. I would put it into ChatGPT, try to figure it out. I was so anxious. So anxious. And this morning I was writing it, the one we set out today, and I was like, wow, I've slowed down a lot. I actually know now how to enjoy what I'm doing because I'm not trying to get anything out of it. And I think the clothes examples is an interesting one because I also have gone through of like, I don't give a shit about anything. I need to like focus on myself. Haven't bought new clothes, been saving money. But now coming to a point of, oh, I want new clothes that reflect this active expression of I like that t-shirt because I like that t-shirt versus I want that t-shirt because I think it makes me fit into this idea of who I'm trying to be in society. And it's almost like when we're transitioning and transforming our lives, the root of the actions we're taking shift of I'm no longer meditating to try to get anywhere. I'm no longer posting on social media to feel better about myself and to look at the views and then feel really anxious when my video doesn't. I never look at my views anymore. Like I used to obsess. It's really this obsession with trying to better yourself, trying to feel better constantly because we're running and running and running away from ourselves. And when you're living a life on autopilot, that may be your base state. And what you're really doing is you're operating in this like very intense state of fear, which is making me think about like if I was to imagine living in Austin, in a slower city, when I did imagine it, I was like, but I want to live in New York. I want to be around everything here. I want to be around all these people. And I remember experiencing kind of like this fear, this FOMO of like, I want to miss out on all the things in New York. Meanwhile, I wasn't doing anything in New York. I wasn't connected to anything. And I think that that example paints the picture that so much of the reason I was doing things there was empty. And it was just happening out of this anxious fight or flight state of, I just have to do this because I don't know what else I would do with my time. I don't know how else I would spend my time. And it makes me think of times where I'd be like, what would I do with myself a whole day alone? How would I spend that time? And now reflecting on living in a new city and spending so much, we basically have like 3 friends here, really. Like we have spent so much time alone, more time I have ever in my life spent alone without distraction. And giving myself that opportunity to get to know myself and to not feed into those distractions and to peel back all the things I was doing. And that kind of became forced when you move to a new city because when you're living somewhere, you have to actually take the effort to go, okay, I'm going to stop doing that. I'm going to stop hanging out with this person. And that's kind of what had happened. In New York, I wasn't really hanging out with that many people either, to be honest. And I think what I'm trying to say is like deepening your inner world and living a more fulfilling life and living a more meaningful life starts when you slow down and you kind of take an audit, an inventory of how am I spending my time and in what state am I doing the activities that I'm doing them in? Is it from a relaxed, connected state of I feel connected to myself, I'm present when I'm doing this, or am I trying to get something? And I think that can be maybe a more digestible way to think about changing your life that doesn't feel so daunting. It's slowing down and trying to understand why am I doing all of these things? Because that fear that is rooted in the things you're doing, meaning the things you're doing are being driven by fear, that fear is keeping you back from expanding your life and expanding your reality to broaden it in ways that you're scared of, but actually reflect what you want deep, deep, deep in your heart and your soul and in your being.
Well, I think what we want deep, deep down in our being can be really intimidating and scary. It's not always just so easy to get there. There's like sacrifices that you have to make. And sometimes it feels too overwhelming to make those sacrifices, to make those changes. And I still don't really know how we got here. Like it just happened. It was like a small series of gradual changes that continued to be made. And, you know, maybe part of that was there was a whole winter in 2021 in New York where restaurants were not open, Like our dopamine receptors were like reset. My understanding of what it meant to have fun was reset. The bar was low. The bar was in the ground. So the bar just never raised from there. So I just went inward from there because the distractions were gone. I mean, even the year leading up to that, the distractions were gone. So I think I see how big of an impact that had of all the distractions just going poof, they're gone. And now you just have to sit with yourself. And I don't think at 23, 24, I would have just actively been like, you know what, I'm going to stop going to things. I'm just going to sit here in my apartment and read and try to figure out why I'm not happy. I don't think I would have done that. I think I would have kept going out, doing all these things that I was doing. Like, I don't think I would have had the wherewithal to be like, you know what? Maybe you should move home for 6 months and just sit with yourself, which ultimately is what I did because of COVID. And that totally altered my life. Totally altered my life. If that didn't happen, I don't think I would be here. I don't know if I would have had the realizations I would have had. I don't know if I would have realized I wanted to date women. Like, there's so many facets of what got me here. And it's really interesting to think, because usually your 20s are a place of just going. But for the very center of it, into my late 20s, I just said, all right, I guess I'm just going to figure out why I'm not happy. And I committed to that. And it's just so crazy to think how external circumstances are what led me to where I'm at right now. And of course, the way I responded to them was ultimately what put me here, where I'm at, but it makes me feel really grateful. I know it was a horrible time for people, but it totally altered the course of my life. Just, it showed me the benefits of just sitting and reflecting on your life at a young age and what that can do. I mean, obviously at any age that is beneficial, but being 24 years old and just sitting with nothing to do, it's interesting how it's impacted us, our generation. Because I know this isn't like a singular experience by any means.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up, because I think that is where our society started to shift. Of people had so much time at home, remote work boomed and was born. It's crazy to think that, like, I remember working remote once, like before COVID. It was so hard to do. It was like impossible. And now so many jobs are remote. Like, it just goes to show that there was a huge shift in reality that broadened our perspectives. And really what it did is it made us sit at home. We had no choice but to be with our thoughts. And that's where you start asking, oh, do I really want to spend time with that person? Oh, I haven't seen that person in 6 months. Or I haven't seen my coworkers in 6 months. Oh, I actually don't give a shit about the work that I do. And it's so interesting comparing that to like our parents' generation. It feels like they were going until they still are, in a way. Like, this massive shift in society trended in this new direction of, oh, you matter. Your well-being matters. And it's crazy to think about how even the 90s work cultures, like what people got away with doing, how it was so acceptable to have such toxic work cultures.
Well, it's crazy to think, because think of what happens when you don't leave your house for 4 months, 6 months, a year. And that happens on a global scale, or at least on a scale of our entire country was in that place. And maybe it was varying from state to state, but it was still like a wide felt experience for like everyone. And you have to think about when something of that magnitude happens and you're stuck in your house and you have nothing to do, what's going to happen to your mental health? You go on your phone, your screen time is up. You can't go to your gym. There's like, you go crazy. So it's like, you have to innovate. Something has to change. It's almost like that was rock bottom. It feels like for so many people. So out of that, on a large scale, so much innovation and change happened. And think about it, like never knowing a day of work from home in your life. Think about what that does to narrowing your awareness, of narrowing your perspective on what you think is possible. Think about the doors that open up when you get to work from home every day and what that does, and the thought of going back and how you think, I'm not doing that, because like you said, you begin to prioritize your well-being. You have more control. You have more leeway. You have more leverage to take care of yourself. And I feel like that definitely spearheaded this movement of self-care, wellness, taking care of yourself on a whole new level. Or maybe that's just been my experience. But it seems like that was a prioritization that happened that in the past we just didn't have time for. Like, I think time is like the biggest thing when you're actually able to slow down, and it can have a massive shift. So I think it's just really fascinating for our conversation to end up here from where it started, of all this change we've been making. And for me to realize, well, when I was 24 and now I'm 28, so 4 years ago, the last 4 years have been so confusing and interesting. My life totally went on a different highway than what it was going down. And a lot of people's life stayed in the same highway. And it's just interesting to see like why, but also it's also interesting to look at the little moments of every day of all your experiences that cumulatively lead you to where you're at.
Yeah, it is really interesting. And I like how you said earlier, like everything happens gradually, like change. Like you look back in the past 4 years and it's almost like no singular moment gets us to where we are in life. And you can argue this has been happening since you were born. Like you have every single moment to moment you've existed on this planet, like has led you to you where you are now. And it's always interesting when we think of, oh, I don't know if I would be here if that didn't happen. And I wonder about that. Like if we didn't meet, where would we be? Would this podcast exist? Like us meeting required me to let go of a lot of shit, required me to let go of the fear of having a girlfriend and the fear of putting myself out there and possibilities. Like when you're talking about possibilities opening up, I think that is the most profound message of change. When I was writing the newsletter today and I was looking at our Substack, I was like, wow, we have a full-on Substack. And if you don't know what Substack is, it's a platform for writers and creators to share their work. And it also is sent out on an email basis. So it provides a good platform for newsletters. And looking at our podcast of, wow, we, 81 5-stars on Spotify. It's pretty damn cool. I don't check that stuff that much anymore. But when I do, it reminds me of, I never thought I would be someone who is creating. I never thought I would be someone who had a newsletter and sharing photos I've taken outside and compiling images and being creative. I never thought I'd have a podcast. I never thought I would be creative. I mean, I guess when I look back to my younger years, it probably makes a little more sense that, oh, right, like that younger me skateboarding and chilling, like, yeah, I could definitely have saw this life for me. But the stories I invested so heavily in between clouded that. And I think it's just so interesting. That's how reality works when you let go. When you stop trying to control and you moment to moment make changes. And that's where consistency comes in. And it's interesting to think about incentive. What will incentivize somebody to take action? What incentivizes an individual, a human, to say, I'm going to start writing every day? I think a lot of the times, like for me, it was this pull for something bigger and this pull of, I need to figure out another way to make money. And it shifted from, it's not about money at all. I believe that this life I'm building will be profitable, and in a lot of ways I have made money already off of it. Not as much as I was making as a lawyer by any means, but it's almost like that level of humility of not caring what anyone thinks about you and truly just living for you. And when you cut out the noise of everyone around you and you cut out the noise of what people think and you stop listening to other people and you stop asking for advice and you just go to yourself, that's where the profound possibilities open up. And that's where we can learn of all of the things and the impacts we can have on this during this life, that's where we realize, oh, I actually really want to start reading books about history or plants or fungi. I want to start learning more. And this shift, this transformation is so hard to describe in words because it's not tangible. It's inner. And a massage therapist told me the other day that keep going because your inner world is infinite. And it's almost like I feel like there's like a whole life inside of me now that is having a lot of fun. I guess I feel alive. I guess that's what it means. Like I feel alive. I feel like I'm immersed in things that light me up. I'm immersed in community. I'm creating. I'm writing. I'm this life that maybe I thought was reserved for quote unquote creators and creatives. Really, I'm learning what it means to express myself and put photos together for my newsletter, and the joy of letting the words flow onto the paper and communicating a message of something I'm passionate about. And I believe we all have things we're passionate about. I really do. We all have that thing inside of us that lights us up. And for me, it's talking about this kind of stuff. It's talking about our thoughts and emotions. It's dissecting things and thinking deeply. But guess what? It's expanding. Now it's also yoga. I love yoga now more than ever before. I love writing more than ever before. And I think going back to what we were saying earlier, like it's all come from slowing down, because by slowing down and pausing and removing all the noise, it's giving me time and space. What we need space. And we don't need infinite time. We have to switch the way we're spending and, quite frankly, wasting a lot of our time. And I think so many times I used to be like, there's not enough time in a day. It's like, no, there is. But you're wasting a lot of it by worrying. How much time are you spending in your mind? I used to be a lot more tired. I'm not tired ever, like ever now. I don't feel bogged down. I don't think about being tired. I feel relaxed. I feel like tired was like a coping mechanism for me resisting the state I was feeling. Like I feel like tired was me being so disconnected from myself. Doesn't even matter, it feels like, how much sleep I get some days, because I'll wake up, I'll feel the feeling, and I'll sit with it. Like how much energy I was investing in worrying and thinking and obsessing and ruminating is really has come down to a very small percentage of my life as a whole, looking at the past 6 to 8 months. Like my focus is on what's in front of me. My focus is on the moment. My focus is on this beautiful life that I know is fleeting and I'll never get back. And I guess I just want to say, like, shifting your focus is profoundly impactful for making change. And shifting your focus to focus on the things that actually matter to you. And that's where the prioritization comes back of, are you going to spend this one life caring what people think about you or worrying or ruminating about the past? Or are you going to shift and transform and evolve and grow? And I think it's really important to recognize this happens slowly. It does not happen overnight. So getting comfortable with the time that it does take, like this has been 3 years in the making, to the point where I can feel comfortable writing a newsletter right now without feeling anxious anymore. So be gracious with yourself, be compassionate with yourself, because the journey is not linear. And I think this has been a very interesting conversation about growth, about change, about evolution, about the way that in which we can transform our lives, because we are always the one in control. It's always you. It's never anyone else. And taking back that control to not the pain, not the ego, no one else, but to you. And really, when we take back control, we let go of control, which is kind of the irony of it all. We accept and we move with life and we flow with life and we become one with everything. And we see ourselves in everyone else too. And you realize there really is no you. It's just awareness all happening at once. And I don't know how I got here. And that doesn't matter because this is the flow of conversation. This is creation. This is expression. And I hope to inspire anyone listening to recognize that it's nothing more than reality expressing itself, meaning you are able to tap into that. And I believe that you can. I really do.
Change is always going to be difficult. Change is always going to be something that is uncomfortable. And I guess like difficult is maybe a word that is confusing because challenging is maybe a better word because it really starts with your inside, your inner world. Are you going to work with yourself or are you going to work against yourself? And sometimes it's really uncomfortable to want to work against ourselves. But sometimes it's really uncomfortable to work with ourselves, as we're diving into new territories. And it's a lot of the times comfortable to sabotage ourselves and to work against ourselves because that's more familiar. But I think that's what's really difficult. I don't think it's difficult to make change inside of yourself, how you perceive the world, how you interact with the world, because it comes down to, do you love yourself? And can you work kindly with yourself? And sometimes that is just a wildly uncomfortable neural pathway to retrain. The old neural pathway might want to pull you down and say, no, don't do that. You're better to be miserable. Yeah, man, it's uncomfortable, but it's always worth it to work with yourself and to find ways to love yourself, because that's also at the core of it too. To go through these changes, it's not easy, but it's a lot less difficult if you work with yourself instead of sabotaging yourself. So it's always going to be an uncomfortable journey, but it's a matter of, do you want it to be uncomfortable and to see positive outcomes more quickly, or more so positive experiences more quickly? Or do you want it to be more difficult and take longer and to resist those things? It's hard. And even when I'm on this podcast all the time, I'm like, what the fuck are you saying? And I want to sabotage myself, but it's a matter of, that's not the point. The point is to choose yourself and to not believe the thoughts that your mind is having about who you are. Like, these are the small moments that build up and make up your every single day. So I think it comes down to just be kind with yourself, be kind to yourself as you go through these changes, and don't think that you have to be hard on yourself, because it's a much more easy journey if we are kind to ourselves.
So I think just to close out this conversation, it's, while there is no destination, the depths in which we can experience reality are so much deeper than we could ever imagine. Our beings are so capable of change. Like, we are made to evolve, and evolution, it's not in the sense of productivity and grind culture and change yourself. It's really evolution of, I am going to, like you said, like, I'm going to choose love. I'm going to stay open when I want to react. I'm going to stay open when I feel the pain. I'm going to sit through the intense discomfort that comes with ripping away everything you know, and validating how hard that is and how painful that is. But it's the way forward. It's the way towards truth, and it's the way towards living a life that's full of beauty. And I remember the motivator for me before I left New York was like, I already know this life. I have spent 8 years here. I have spent a lot of time, not even in this city, but in this way of life. And again, it's not a lifestyle. I have spent a lot of time working against myself. I have spent a lot of time, quite frankly, hating myself. I've spent a lot of time judging myself. All right, I'm going to die at some point, so why not try a different route? Why not try a different way of operating in this world and seeing what happens? And that's why we can't give up when it feels hard. We have to give ourselves time. And with time comes growth, and with growth comes understanding and insight. And the insight I have from this journey is profoundly impactful. It's changed my life. It's changed people around me's lives. It's the ripples, because we are all connected. And thank you for listening. Thank you for being part of this conversation. And I'm excited to continue chatting and making an impact, sharing this experience of deepening our inner world, deepening really both the inner and the outer, showing that it is possible to live a deeper life, and that where you are right now is not the only place to be. You can change your life, you can change your reality, and it all starts with you. It all starts within, and it all starts with changing your thoughts. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you for being part of the Life Unpotted podcast and community. We love talking to you guys. We love showing up here every Tuesday and Thursday, and this podcast means the world to us. So thank you for your support, and we will talk to you on Thursday.